Hey guys, welcome back to Caffeine and Crime, and today I have another episode from Serial Killer Season for you guys. Today is part 1 of the Zodiac Killer. The unknown Zodiac Killer targeted young couples, then he would later call the police and turn in his own crime. Not only that, but he sent in anonymous cryptograms for the police to try to figure out who he was. He loved playing mind games, and it's crazy to think that what would have happened if those cryptograms were actually cracked and they actually got the guy. But we still don't know who the Zodiac Killer is. Since I recorded this episode a couple of years ago, in 2020, and I'm just now uploading it to YouTube, I wanted to mention, because I don't mention it later on, that just this past year, new detectives on the case think they may have found the Zodiac Killer, and he died some years ago, but it's never even been confirmed, or it's still not really confirmed, but some of them believe that it was this certain person. I honestly don't think we're ever going to know for sure, but it still is a very interesting and just crazy case. Today's episode, we're focusing in on the victims and the beginning of everything that unraveled with this mysterious killer. Make sure you grab your caffeine and continue listening for part 1 of the Zodiac Killer. I'll be back next week with part 2.
I wanted to save the Zodiac Killer for last because I'm not sure how long these 2 parts are going to be. I've tried to put a lot of information together. I'm currently watching the Hulu series. It's a 4-part series, and I'm only half of the way through. But it is called The Most Dangerous Animal of All, and it's about a guy who says that his biological father was the Zodiac Killer. And I believe it came out like earlier this year. So when I seen that it came out, I was like, oh my gosh, I had already started, when I seen it, I had already started my serial killer season. I was like, I gotta touch base on the Zodiac Killer. Not that I, say like I love all these killings or anything, but I can say that if this was like a movie, it would be very cool. And I know that there is movies out there that are supposed to be about the Zodiac Killer and all of that. I personally have not watched them. Let me know if there's some good ones out there that I need to watch. But to know that this was a real life thing is just terrifying to me, because it was so like thought out and just If you guys didn't know, the Zodiac Killer, or simply the Zodiac, is an unidentified American serial killer. So like unidentified, they've never found out who the actual Zodiac Killer is. So this serial killer was in the Northern California part from the late 1960s to the early 1970s. And it was like a series of killings, and then there would be these letters and cards that were sent into like the local area's press, and it was like the Bay Area. The letters included different cryptograms or like ciphers, and only one of them that have been sent in has definitely been solved. He murdered 5 known victims, and he like kind of targeted young couples, and this happened from December 1968 till October of 1969. And I don't know, I mean, it's a crazy one, but we're gonna just dive right on in. So the first victims that we know of are David Arthur Faraday, who was 17 years old, and Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16. They were both shot and killed on December 20th, 1968, on Lake Herman Road, within the city limits of Berryessa? I have no idea, but these are known as the Lake Herman Road murders. So the couple were on their first date and planned to attend a Christmas concert at Hogan High School, about 3 blocks away from Betty's home. The couple instead visited a friend before stopping at a local restaurant and then driving out on Lake Herman Road. At about 10:15 p.m., David parked his mother's Rambler in a drive turnout that was gravel, which was well known as Lover's Lane. You guys know how it is when you're a teenager and, you're on a date and You just want to be alone. You don't want to be around everybody else. You just want to have time. So that's kind of what these two were doing. They were 16 and 17, and terrifying part happens next. So shortly after 11 p.m., their bodies were found by Stella Borges, who lived nearby. The Solano County Sheriff's Department investigated the crime, but no leads developed. Utilizing available forensic data at the time, Robert Graysmith, he was able to tell that there was another car that had pulled into the turnout prior to 11 p.m. and parked beside the couple. So, like, this car pulled right up alongside the Betty and David's car. So the killer exited his car, walked around to where he possibly told the couple to get out of the car. It had looked like Betty exited the car first. When David was halfway out, the killer apparently shot him in the head, and then the killer shot Betty 5 times in the back as she fled. Her body was found 28 feet away from the car, and then the killer drove off. They were both killed at the scene. The next victims are Michael Renault Mago, I think is how you pronounce that. He was 19, and Darlene Elizabeth Farron, who was 22. They were shot on July 4th, 1969, in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park. While Michael did survive the attack, Darlene was pronounced dead on arrival at Kaiser Foundation Hospital. This is known as the Blue Rock Springs murder. Just before midnight on July 4th, 1969, Darlene and Michael drove into the Blue Rock Springs Park, 4 miles from the Lake Herman Road murder site, and parked. While the couple sat in Darlene's car, a second car drove into the lot and parked alongside them, but almost immediately drove away. The car returned at about 10 minutes later, and this car parked behind them. The driver of this car exited the vehicle, approaching the passenger side door of Elizabeth's car, carrying a flashlight and a 9mm Luger. The killer directed the flashlight into Michael and Darlene's eyes before shooting them, firing 5 times. Both victims were hit, and several bullets had passed through Michael and into Darlene. The killer walked away from the car, but upon hearing Michael kind of moaning and making noises, he returned and shot each of the victims twice before driving off. The next day, on July 5th, 1969, at 12:40 a.m., a man phoned the police department to report and claim responsibility for the attack. The caller also took credit for the murders of Jensen and Faraday 6.5 months earlier. Police traced the call to a phone booth at a gas station at Springs Road. Oh my gosh, chills. It was located about 0.3 of a mile from Darlene's home, and only a few blocks from the police department that he was calling to. Darlene was pronounced dead at the hospital. Michael survived the attack despite being shot in the face, neck, and chest. Michael described his attacker as a 26 to 30-year-old, 195 to 200 pounds, or possibly even more. He said he was at least 5 foot 8 inches, a white male with short, light brown curly hair. On August 1st, 1969, 3 letters prepared by the killer were received at the Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. So the same letter was sent out to these 3 different public press places. Were nearly identical is what it says, so it's like he took the time to master up all 3 of them. And they were described by a psychiatrist as being written by someone you would expect to be brooding and isolated. So someone who was really pissed at life, apparently. And this person took credit for the shootings at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. Each letter also included 1/3 of a 408-syllable cryptogram, which the killer claimed contained his identity. One of the first letters said, "Dear editor, I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman, and the girl on the 4th of July near the golf course. To prove I killed them, I shall state some facts which only I and the police know. Christmas, 1 brand name of ammo, Super X. 2, 10 shots were fired. 3, the boy was on his back with his feet to the car. 4, the girl was on her right side, feet to the west. Looks like it says Sally, maybe. One girl was wearing slacks, and the boy was also shot in the knee. Brand name of, and then I can't even make this out, but it says brand name of something else. So pretty much in this letter, he disclosed that he knew everything the police knew and weren't putting out there. He also let it be known that if they figured out the cryptogram, they would figure out his identity. Literally, it's like a movie. Also demanded that they be printed on each paper's front page, or he would cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend. The Chronicle published its third of the cryptogram on page 4 of the next day's edition. An article printed alongside the code quoted Police Chief Jack E. Stilts was saying, "We're not satisfied that the letter was written by the murderer," and requested the writer send a second letter with more facts to prove his identity. The threatened murders did not happen, and all 3 parts were eventually published. On August 7th, 1969, another letter was received at the San Francisco Examiner with the salutation, "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking." This was the first time the killer had used this name for identification. The letter was a response to Chief Stilt's request for more details that would prove he had killed the 3 teenagers. In it, the Zodiac included details about the murders, which had not yet been released to the public, as well as a message to the police that when they cracked his code, they will have me. Quotation marks around that one. On August 8th, 1969, Donald and Betty Hardin of Salinas, California, cracked the 408 symbol cryptogram. Geniuses here. It contained a misspelled message in which the killer seemed to reference the most dangerous game. He also said he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. No name appears in the decoded text, and the killer said that he would not give away his identity because it would slow down or stop his slave collection. The note said, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill. Something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and then I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for the afterlife." And then it looks like a bunch of letters together. But you can see in the actual note, and I'm going to try to include as much as I can of like the cryptograms and like this note and stuff like that on today's blog post if you guys want to go check it out. But from the actual note, you can see that there's a lot of misspelling and stuff. So that's how they cracked it. They went in and took like the letters that were used in place of other ones and were able to crack it. But we are now moving on to what is known as the Lake Berryessa murder. I hope I'm saying that right. But Brian Calvin Hartnell, who was 20, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, who was 22, stabbed on September 27th, 1969 at Lake Berryessa in Napa County. So Brian survived 8 stab wounds to the back, but Cecilia unfortunately died as a result of her injuries on September 29th, 1969. So on September 27, 1969, Pacific Union College students Brian and Cecilia were picnicking at Lake Berryessa on a small island connected by a sand spit. Is that a real thing? A sand spit to Twin Oak Ridge. A white man about 5 feet 11 inches, weighing more than 170 pounds, with combed greasy brown hair, approached them wearing a black executor-style hood with clip-on glasses over the eye holes and a bib-like device on his chest that had a white 3x3-inch cross-circle symbol on it. He approached them with a gun, which Brian believed to be a .45. The hooded man claimed to be an escaped convict from the jail with a 2-word name. In either Colorado or Montana, a police officer later on had said he'd been referring to a jail in Deer Lodge, Montana, where he had killed a guard and stolen a car, explaining that he now needed their car and money to go to Mexico, as the vehicle he had been driving was too hot, he said. He had brought pre-cut lengths of plastic clotheslines and told Shepard to tie up Hartnell. So pretty much telling Cecilia, tie up Brian, I'm going to take your car, and I'm going to flee to Mexico. But then the killer checked and tightened Brian's bonds after discovering that Cecilia had bound Brian's hands loosely. Brian initially believed this event to be a weird robbery, but the man drew a knife and stabbed them both repeatedly. Brian suffering 6 and Cecilia 10 wounds in the process. The killer then hiked 500 yards back up to Knoxville Road, drew the cross circle symbol on Brian's car door with a black felt tip pen and wrote beneath it 12/20/68, 7/4/69, September 27th, 69, 6:30 by knife. At 7:40 p.m., the killer called the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a pay telephone to report the latest crime. The caller first stated to the operator that he wished to report a murder, no, a double murder. Before stating that he had been the perpetrator of the crime, the phone was found, still off the hook, minutes later at the Napa Car Wash on Main Street in Napa by KVON radio reporter Pat Stanley, only a few blocks from the sheriff's office. Yet, 27 miles from the crime scene, detectives were able to lift a still wet palm print from the telephone, but were never able to match it to any suspect. After hearing their screams for help, a man and his son, who were fishing at the nearby cove, discovered the victims and summoned help by contacting park rangers. Napa County Sheriff's deputies Dave Collins and Ray Land were the first law enforcement officers to arrive at the scene. Cecilia Shepard was conscious when Collins arrived, providing him with a detailed description of the attacker. Brian and Cecilia were taken to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa by ambulance. Cecilia lapsed into a coma during transport to the hospital and never regained consciousness. She died 2 days later, but Brian survived to recount his tale to the press. Napa County Sheriff Detective Ken Narlow, who was assigned to the case from the outset, worked on solving the crime until his retirement from the department in 1987. So there is some of the story to kind of wrap your head around. So pretty much there was 4 victims and one of them survived. There is more to the story that we're going to be jumping into next week. I want to save a little bit more of it for the beginning of next week's episode. But then we're going to be jumping into different suspects. And we're also going to talk a little bit more about these cryptograms and some more letters that were sent in. And I also do want to touch base a little bit on the show I talked about at the beginning of this, which is The Most Dangerous Animal of All. If you guys want to catch up with me and watch it, I'm going to try to finish the last 2 parts before I record next week's episode for you guys. It's really interesting though. It's not much so far. It hasn't been too much about the Zodiac Killer as much as talking about Gary Stewart's life and kind of about his book that he had published in 2014. But his biological father, Earl Van Best Jr., he says it has led him to believe that this man who was his biological father is the Zodiac Killer. So it's really intriguing if you guys have not seen it yet. Like I said, it's available on Hulu. I'm going to try to watch the last 2 parts so that I can have more to talk about on it next week. So yeah, we're going to talk about that, talk about some other suspects that could have been linked to the Zodiac Killer, and what we know of as of today with the technology, the forensics we have now. It's insane of how many different older cases, and that's why there is so many older cases, is the lack of technology and just the lack of the forensics and all of that. So we're going to wrap it up next week and officially end season 2, but I hope you guys enjoy this part 1 today, and yeah, I will see you guys next week for season 2, episode 10 of the Zodiac Killer.
Feeling pretty pent up when I'm swerving through the night. Got a million bitches and they're trying to hit